Check, check, check. Hey, what's up, all? Sorry about that. I use this Restream app on all sorts of platforms. DLive, Twitch now, Periscope, Facebook, YouTube. Sometimes it'll just not work on a certain platform, and then you have to restart the stream, which means if you're on YouTube, it kicks everyone out. So sorry about all that. Thank you all so much for joining. We got a good show tonight. Maybe get to some phone calls even. We'll see what's up. But let me know if there's a problem with lag or anything like that. As always, because I'm a broke person, I'm using poor equipment. Systemic poverty, right? Can I claim some victimhood status? Is that why my equipment's no good? I did get a haircut. Thanks for my beautiful wife cut my hair this weekend, so I didn't even get out. I'd been saying, oh, once I get around to the lockdown ending, I'll go get my haircut. Man, I actually got it cut it down. And again, as you can tell, I'm balding. I got a little sun on my head, so yippee. All right. So the show today, what I wanted to talk about was starting with the idea of systemic racism. So I'm going to show you at least some advice that I have. I don't know if advice is the right way. I'm just going to give my opinion on how to deal with people that talk about this country being systemically racist. Now, if you're new to my show, let me tell you where I'm coming from. I think this is the greatest country in the history of the world. I think the reason for that is we focused on the individual in our foundational documents, and that the concepts of personal liberty and personal responsibility are the most important concepts to this country. However, I also believe that we should try to have an active dialogue. I'm against censorship of any form. I try to talk to people that disagree with me. I have friends that are Democrats, etc. So one of the things I like to do is try to debate other people. If you check out my YouTube channel, you'll see some recent debates I had. One was basically a 6-on-1 debate, me versus 6 people that basically thought that the riots were a good thing, or at least were acceptable. And then another with a Twitch streamer called Destiny, who's on the left wing, where I kind of at least showed that I could be a reasonable person. And I thought I won the debates quite handily, but I guess leave it up to you. The point is, the important thing is to show that we are righteous, we are moral, and our ideas are what's best for this country, and we can talk to other people. Even if they don't want to hear us, we still go out there and show that we're willing to talk. We're not the side that needs to censor. We don't need the tech companies to censor people on our behalf. We don't need the mainstream media to be 95% controlled by us. We don't need to kick off independent content creators that don't agree with us. We don't need to keep people that disagree with us out of college campuses from speaking, because our ideas are the right ideas. And so I, as someone who believes in these principles, do listen in good faith to people that disagree with me, and I try to listen to their arguments and respond to them as best I can. And by the way, I'm not going to say that I'll never have my mind change. I've changed my mind on a lot of things in my life, so I'm willing to listen to the other side and listen to their arguments. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's why I wanted to talk about systemic racism today. So let me first by saying this. Why am I talking about systemic racism? One of the problems that people have that are defending these protests or defending the riots are they can't agree what it's about. For example, why are there riots going on in the UK right now? If it's about the murder of George Floyd, why would police in the UK suffer or be impugned because of police in Minneapolis? If it's about systemic racism in the slave trade in the United States, why would the UK be part of that? Why would Italy? Why would other places in Europe that you see? And so it's clear that that's not what it's about. When I debated all these people this weekend, plus people I've talked to on social media, almost all of them will concede almost immediately that these protests and riots were not over the death of George Floyd. But from there, they all have different reasons. From the nebulous, it's systemic racism, or it's police interactions in general, with not necessarily murdering, but their interactions in general with the black community. Or it's that the entire country is racist and needs to burn, or it's that we need to have a Marxist revolution in this country, or it's that we need to end the institution of policing in this country. They can't agree. And the problem is when you allow your opponents to not define exactly what they believe in or define the terms they're using, they'll be able to shift to discuss anything that they want and make it seem like all the data then fits into their argument. And so that's why it's important to talk about this. Now, full disclosure, I support the peaceful protesters. I am against their narrative that is either that cops are hunting and killing unarmed black men because they're racist, or against the narrative that the police and this country is built on systemic racism and we're still a systemically racist country. So I reject that narrative. But you have the right to be angry over George Floyd. And one of the great things about the First Amendment is you have the right to protest and say what you want, even if I disagree with it. So I understand people being upset about the murder of George Floyd. I disagree with the racial motivations or the protests behind it. And I certainly abhor any of the violence that we see coming out of that. So that's where I stand. Yes, creative group on Periscope, a non-black attempting to discuss racism on black people. And that's a good place to start, actually. So one of the first things you'll hear is, if you're not black, then you can't talk about racism. And this has to do with sort of this postmodernist philosophy that there is no such thing as truth, that truth is subjective. If you want a good example of how this plays out politically, go back and look at the Kavanaugh hearings and listen to like Cory Booker and Kamala Harris say over and over, Christine Blasey Ford, it didn't matter what the truth was. Her truth was that Kavanaugh assaulted her. Now that's a very dangerous ideology, because what that means is we have no connection. There is no such thing as dialogue anymore. I can't have a conversation with you because I'm not you, therefore I don't know how you interpret the world. And when we make these divisions and we say things like, well, you can't understand a certain group of people because they look different than you, it makes dialogue inevitable. I could play the same game. I could say, well, you don't know what life's like as a poor white man. It would be nonsense. People would say, no. And then you get into this sort of, bona fides, who could show they're a bigger victim. That's nonsense. Of course, I could talk about issues in the black community based on objective truth. I can't subjectively tell you what it's like to be black, just like you can't subjectively tell me what it's like to be me. Each individual will have a subjective way of viewing the world. And by subjective, I mean we all interpret things and we all have different lived experiences. So if the argument's quite literally, well, you're not me, so you don't know how I feel, okay, then what's the dialogue? And here's the problem. When dialogue's not acceptable, violence is what fills the void. So if this country's willing to say, well, black people don't know what it's like to be white, and white people don't know what it's like to be black, and Hispanics don't know what it's like to be either, and neither do Asians, etc., then we no longer have a country. We just have naked tribalism. And everyone says, my side's right, you don't know what it's like to be me, that's the end of the story. Creative group on Periscope says, so I'm erasing history. No, I'm not erasing history. What did I say that erased history whatsoever? There is objective reality in history. Slavery existed. Jim Crow existed. But that doesn't mean that we could say, well, we then don't know how that makes people feel, so therefore we have to bow out of the conversation. It's the same nonsense you hear with the abortion debate. Well, if you're a man, you don't get to speak on it. Only women should be allowed to speak. That's not the way the world works. And again, if that's how we're going to do things, then dialogue will be inevitable, which means violence will occur. For example, I could make a credible argument that the only race that is publicly and culturally aggrieved by the people in cultural dominance in this country is the white race. Now, I'll explain in a second why that doesn't matter to me in a broader sense. But for example, the argument that white people have some sort of original sin or must pay for the sins of their ancestors when they weren't alive when things like slavery was going on means that somehow white people are inferior to those of a different race. That's racism. Judging someone's moral characteristic based solely on their skin color is racism. And again, that's a game that every group in every country ever in the world could play. Every group at some point or another has been aggrieved and has aggrieved someone. For example, we could take the Native Americans. There's this rewriting of history that goes on that says, well, the Native Americans were just these beautiful, wonderful people, and there was no violence that occurred in the United States before the Europeans came over. That's not true. Every tribe of Native Americans that existed probably at some point won some sort of battle to take that land from a tribe that was there previously. In fact, the mere fact of engaging in creating tribes means that you were protecting yourself and coming together against outside tribes. And we know that things like murder and rape and all that stuff occurred both with the native population in what is now America, also in Europe, also in Africa, also in Asia, etc. When we gloss over this history and make it seem like, oh, no, this society was completely peaceful and without sin, and this society is completely sinful and without peace, what that does is it destroys agency of both of those societies. And we can see that occurring right now. We see how that plays out in reality. I know, and I've talked to people that happen to be black or Hispanic or things like that, that say that they are appalled at the treatment they get, where they're not treated as adults. They're treated like children that need to be protected by, the Democrats or by people in positions of power. That's absurd. That is a sort of bigotry of low expectations. Oh, you don't know better. The reason crime's so high in your neighborhood is because racism, and you didn't do anything wrong and you're a victim. There, we'll take care of you. That's offensive in its own right. How does it justify what the Europeans did? I don't know. How is anything in history justified? Again, what you're making, the argument that this person's making on Periscope, is the idea of original sin. This country was founded on taking land from the Native Americans or had slavery, therefore it must be punished. And don't be mistaken, this is what many, many, many people engaged in these protests in the Black Lives Matter movement believe. They won't come right out and say it, but they think the United States needs punished. And so when they talk about their plans being better for the United States, that's not what they mean. They know what they're doing is damaging to society, and they're good with that. All you have to do is go to a feminist class on campuses or an intersectional class on campus. They'll tell you, what's your goal? To dismantle the power structures in the United States. That's what they want. They want to focus on sins of 200 years in the past and think that there needs to be punishment now. They don't realize that that type of rhetoric will actually lead to things getting worse for everyone, including the community that they're pretending to speak for. And the key word is pretending, because they don't care. They don't care about these communities at all. They use these communities as a pawn. That's why right now you see liberal white elite people that are looting and burning down inner city neighborhoods, but they're not looting or burning down their own neighborhoods, are they? I wonder why that is. So we'll get into that more. So let me talk a little about my race for a second. And I get heat from people for this a lot. I don't care at all that I'm white. If white people tomorrow would decide to never procreate again, I wouldn't care at all. My legacy and what I would like to see going forth in the United States well after I'm dead is people that think like me, not people that look like me. And when I say people that think like me, I don't mean that totally agree with me. There will never be anyone in history that totally agrees with me or you or anyone else. But I mean that values the ideas that our founding fathers did, that of personal responsibility and personal liberty. I don't care if you're brown, what your hue of skin, if you're brown, black, I don't care if you're Native American, I don't care if you're from Asian descent, that doesn't matter to me. I don't care how you look. And I get a lot of heat, oh, but aren't you concerned about your culture? But to me, the culture is how we think. I couldn't even tell you what my ancestry is. I think I'm part Italian, part Irish. I really don't know. I don't really care. I never really looked into it. Don't care. I know about my family, my personal family. I know what they were about, going up as back as far as my grandfather, and a little bit about my great-grandparents. So when people say, oh, I'm only concerned about these issues because I want to talk about like white grievances or something like that, that's not true at all. I'm merely pointing out the fact that once you start to play the racially divisive game, that you have unintended consequences. For example, it's shown over and over when you have these implicit racial bias courses at work. So you'll have big companies that you'll have to take a course about implicit racial bias. And these are these garbage tests that they do. Well, they'll show you pictures real fast of white people and black people and Hispanic people. And then you rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 or a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And they're like, oh, it takes more time to rate the black people, or the black people get rated lower. Well, it could just be because most people probably have a tendency to have more favorable reactions to people that look like them. That's true in every society. That's not racism. By the same token, someone like me is going to look out of place in China or in Africa or in Asia, wherever, South America. But studies show again and again that it doesn't actually improve understanding and relationships between white and black people. They basically remain the same when it comes to these workplace groups. But what it does do is decreases relationship with poor white people. Because here's the problem. Here's the TLDR portion, right? Spoiler alert. Here's the end game, right? The establishment on both sides, they don't care about you at all. They'll say Black Lives Matter. They don't care. They don't care at all. You know what they care about? personally enriching themselves, getting more power, and they actively want to go after the actual normal working Americans and poor Americans in this country. They want everyone dependent on them so they could usher in a globalist state that is a neo-feudalism with supreme power for the government. They want everyone reliant on the government. And once you rely on them, then you have to praise them and listen to them, or they'll shut you off. That's what they want. They want San Francisco for all of us. We live in squalor, with needles on the street. They live in their mansions at the top of the hill. And they'll throw us bread and circus as long as we don't criticize them. That's what they want. People right now think that do you think that it's a coincidence that we supposedly have this revolution of Black Lives Matter? That's being pushed by Nike and Amazon and Chase Bank and Ben & Jerry's, Uber Eats, basically every corporation, the NFL, the NBA, every politician on the left, most politicians on the right. We have people that if you even say things as heinous as, well, buildings matter too, and you shouldn't be burning down buildings for this, such as the editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer that won a Pulitzer for his paper, he's fired. You can't criticize. Drew Brees just says, I respect the flag. He's on what? Apology 4? Do you think it's a coincidence that this revolution is being endorsed by the very people at top that are so elite and wealthy? Do you think it's a coincidence that they're defending, deflecting, or celebrating the rioting and the looting? As long as it's not in their neighborhoods, while it's in these inner city neighborhoods, they're okay with it? You think that's a coincidence? Do you think that places like Chase Bank that have been charged with predatory lending to poor people, including the black community, is avoiding being looted by putting Black Lives Matter up in their window? You think that's a coincidence? And we'll get to sort of this virtue signaling later. That's what we end up seeing happen. So the argument is that somehow this is about systemic racism. And the reason they have to make this argument is because the data won't back up the underlying belief that seems evident, right? What seems evident to the average person, if you ask the average person that wasn't really involved in these protests, what are the protests about? And it would be this. Well, the fact that this cop was a racist and killed George Floyd. Well, there's no proof of that. None. They know they can't prove that, so they have to make it about something else. Well then, the next step. Well, it's about police killing unarmed black men. But it can't really be about that either, and here's why. The Washington Post has recently updated their statistics, so I apologize for this. Last year, according to the Washington Post, and it actually has a list to each newspaper article from hometown newspapers about each specific incident, 15 unarmed blacks were killed by police. Now, I believe the number was upwards of 26 unarmed whites that was killed. Now, in a country where over 5,000 blacks a year on average are killed, murdered, we're talking about 15. Now, the first thing you have to do is make the assumption that all 15 of these unarmed killings of blacks were unjustified. That's just not true. If you read through, you'll see that there were plenty of incidents where lethal force would be justified. For example, one incident was an unarmed black man running his car into a police officer. So the police officer shot. Just because he was unarmed with a weapon, he was armed with a car. Or there was an incident of a female black police officer who was being choked to death. And she used her firearm and unfortunately killed the person that was choking her to death. So when you look at each of these individual incidents, oftentimes it either shows that the killing was justified or at least was ambiguous. There's almost never evidence that race was a motivating factor. And in the couple cases where it looks like, wow, this looks really bad, 2 of the cases, officers were charged. But we cite these statistics, and this is the problem that you'll see as I continue to talk about this idea of systemic racism. We cite statistics and we say, therefore, racism. So we know, for example, more white people are killed by the police by a fair margin than blacks a year. But what they'll say, and this is a true argument, is that because there are so fewer blacks, your chance as a black person is about 3 times more than that as a white person to be shot and killed by the police. And that's true. The facts back that up. The data backs that up. But they just say, and therefore that proves racism. But that doesn't prove racism. We have to look at the underlying reasons for that data. For example, and I use this example all the time, and no one really has a credible argument for why this would be the case. If that's the argument, If we could say this group of people are more likely to be killed by police, therefore the reason they were killed was because they're from that group, then we can play that game with other groups. For example, the vast majority, I believe over 90% of people on average a year that are killed by police are men, despite only being 49% of the population. That means the discrepancy between men being likely to be killed by police versus women is far greater than the discrepancy between blacks and whites. So does that prove that the police are sexist and they hate men? Of course not, because you would say, well, wait a minute. Why is that? Were the men involved in more violent crime? Statistics show that actually men tend to be more aggressive and commit more violent crime. And so it would make sense if you're more likely to be involved in a violent crime, you're probably more likely to have a violent interaction with police. And that's the correct argument. Is that necessarily true? Why are men more violent? Good question. Let's get into it. I don't say I have all the answers, but I can see that just pointing to a data point and saying that proves bigotry is wrong. The same could be true of the inner city communities. Now again, I think the mistake that's made is that we differentiate this by race. I think that if you differentiated it by poor urban neighborhoods and everywhere else, the statistics would bear out the same. So if you looked at the situation and just said this, you have Group A and Group B. And in Group A, law enforcement officers kill them 3 times higher rates than Group B. Now, even that number is misleading because although that is technically true, we're not talking about thousands of people being murdered. We're talking about 15 last year. And many of those were justifiable. So the 3 times number is sort of misleading. So I hope everyone's following me. I wish I had a guest as well. I tried to line up some guests, Creative. And if you would like Creative, if you're someone that comes from the left, may I recommend going to my YouTube channel and watching me debate Twitch streamer Destiny, or there's another debate on there where I debated, and there's 6 people from the left, so you could judge the argumentation that I have versus them. So if we said that Group A is 3 times more likely to be killed than Group B by the police officers, but then I said to you, but Group A, despite only being 13% of the population, commits 52% of homicides. Now it starts to make sense. Basically, the key factor isn't race. The key factor, it seems to be, is you look at each community and you can almost directly proportionally guess how much violence there will be with police officers, both justified by the cops and unjustified by the cops, based on how violent those communities are. And that makes sense. That's why black people that live in my neighborhood in rural Pennsylvania aren't likely to be shot by police. Because the police are on edge because they're not going into communities that are basically war zones. That seems to be the determining factor, but instead we ignore that. And we can see that the data is never really addressed. Most people just say if you bring up this data, that proves you're racist. Data isn't racist. How you use it can be. I'm not saying black people are inferior. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm appalled at how our country has let down some of these inner city communities. Let's take homicide perpetrators out of it for a minute. Because people say, oh, you only want to focus on black murderers. That's not true at all. Why don't we talk about victims of homicide? Would it surprise you to know that it's almost the exact same percentage of homicide victims that are black? 13% of the population making up 50% of the homicides. That's appalling. We owe it to ourselves as a country and to those communities to find out, why is this occurring? What can we do to help? But when we're afraid to have an honest conversation about it because racism, then things never get better. And what you end up seeing happening is every 4 years, it seems like the Democratic Party says, oh, everyone else is racist, so vote for us. And so then blacks vote for the Democrats, and then the Democrats don't do anything to help the blacks, or they make the situation worse. But don't think I'm blaming black people for voting Democrat, because the problem with Republicans are they don't even try to talk to the black community. I've told this story several times. I ran for Congress as a Republican. One of the things I did both in running for Congress and as a volunteer who actually got offered a job by the Trump campaign was I said, what are we doing as a Republican Party to reach out to communities that don't traditionally vote Republican, such as single women, young people, and black people? And I was told we don't really go after those groups, we go after the low-hanging fruit. And so if I lived in the inner city and was black and I saw this death and destruction, and I had to choose between a Democratic Party that has a bunch of bad ideas for me, or a Republican Party that refuses to talk to me, I'd probably vote for the Democrats. So don't even think that I'm blaming them for that decision. But the very people that are causing this systemic poverty and that have been sucking the wealth out of the working and the lower class in this country for 50 years are the people that are virtue signaling the hardest. Oh, Black Lives Matter. Yeah. Why? Because they know if they make it racial, that it'll cause division. And if poor white people and poor black people are fighting with each other, and if you could just put, screw over all poor people in these companies or in politics, but as long as you bend a knee and say Black Lives Matter, then you're let off the hook. Then the establishment that has screwed over the average American, they never have to answer for their crimes. Or for their, I don't know if crimes, in many cases crimes, ineptitude, corruption. That's what we see occurring. Now, this is where the conversation of systemic racism comes in, okay? So this is all leading to this conversation because people don't really know how to handle that point. They'll try to make nuanced arguments. They'll say, yes, well, there's more interactions per capita with the black community than the white community from police. That's not true. According to the 2018 Bureau of Justice statistics, actually, it's about 1.3% of white people, I believe, are involved a year in police-initiated responses. In other words, when you're dealing with the police, but you didn't call them. And the number's about 1.2 for the black community. But regardless, what people will tend to say is, okay, even if all that's true, the reason that there's violence in the inner city is because of systemic racism. So that's what I wanted to talk about here. Now, the argument would be, we had a historically racist country, and therefore blacks have never been able to recover from that. And because of that, that has forced them to become violent and engage in all this violent crime. This is a gross oversimplification and just flat out wrong. Now, there is some truth into what they say, as is most lies start with some truth. Did our country engage in slavery? Yes. Did it engage in Jim Crow? Yes. Were there other historical abuses of the black community? Yes. Now, first, of course, there were abuses of other communities, such as the Asian community. Remember, as FDR locked up in the Korematsu decision Asian Americans in internment camps during World War II out of fear that they were spies for Japan. There's been historic abuses of the Jewish community. There's been historic abuses of basically any community you can think of. That's true. No one's denying that. The question is twofold. One, are those abuses responsible for situations we see today? And second, then what do we do about it if that would be the case? So to answer the second question first, they don't have good answers. Reparations? So you punish one group of people, you take wealth from one group of people based on something that they had no part of that occurred 200 years ago, and you give it to a group of people that they weren't experienced with racism 200 years ago. But that's what we're going to do. And we think that'll bridge the racial divide? What's that do to poor white people? What's that do to poor Asian people? What's that do to poor Hispanic people? So now we just prop up one poor group based on their ethnicity. The rest of the group, sorry about your luck. There's no good answer to that. What people say, well, dismantle the country. Do you think that's worthwhile? Why do you think millions of immigrants try to get into this country a year? Because it's so racist? Because it's so terrible? So we're going to dismantle the greatest country in the history of the world because of sins of 200 years ago? Now, you can't point me to a country that hasn't engaged in sins at all. You can't do it. So what are we comparing the United States to? And it isn't ironic, the same people that make these sort of arguments totally ignore the fact that we actually have slave trade occurring right now in the world. But they don't focus on those countries. Just like they'll talk about how the United States is a terrible country to be gay in. But then they'll ally themselves with countries in the Islamic world that are throwing gay people off buildings. And so right out of the gate, you could sort of see the hypocrisy of this. People are having their land taken from them or being murdered in South Africa right now if they're white. Yet somehow we don't want to talk about that. Why is it only the Eurocentric countries, the United States and Europe, that we talk about the sins of the past? For example, we could look at the Armenian genocide. We could look at historical abuses from places like Turkey. Does that mean that the Turks need to lose their country? Why don't we talk about that? And it goes back to this idea of cultural Marxism, which the idea is that you're not an individual, you're just a series of categories. So I'm not Rob Noor an individual, I'm Rob Noor white, male, straight, Christian, fat. So I got a little oppression points. And they oversimplify everything and say, these groups are oppressors, and the counter to those groups are oppressed. So if you're white, it's oppressor. If you're black, you're oppressed. But that's dehumanizing. None of us are monolithic. We're all unique individuals. And when we treat people as merely a member of their category, we dehumanize them. We take away their personal agency, which is arguably the most important thing you have. Freedom is that you live with your choices. You should have the freedom to make your choices, and you should have the freedom to live with the consequences of your choices. When we say, no, you're not an individual, you're just a group. By the way, that's why you see the vitriol against people like Kanye West and Candace Owens. Because they refuse to say, I'm a monolithic member of this racial group, and therefore I agree with what I'm supposed to say politically as a member of that racial group. That's what we see occurring. But even aside from that, the entire idea that you could look at categories and say, based on gender, race, religion, sexual preference, etc., and say one side's oppressed and the other side's oppressor is on its face incorrect. Because here's the truth. Black people are oppressed and they're oppressors. And white people are oppressors and they're oppressed. And men are oppressors and oppressed, and women are oppressors and oppressed. And Christians are oppressors and oppressed, and all other religions are oppressors and oppressed. The reality is, when you make things so black and white and say, this group is always right and this group is always wrong, or this group is righteous and this group is immoral, that's more apt to what they're saying. You've engaged in a form not only of intellectual dishonesty, but bigotry. And it has real consequences, despite those people I was debating the other day. I said, what about all the white hatred we see coming out of many of the people from Black Lives Matter? Oh, we didn't hear that. We have white people washing the feet of black people. We have white people going on saying that they're ashamed to be white, like Greg Popovich, coach of the Spurs, San Antonio Spurs. We have people at these rallies shouting, kill white people. We have people demanding that white people give up their wealth and things like that because it's ill-gotten and they have sins of their forefathers. That's what's happening. Instead of focusing on police brutality and inequity in the leadership of this country, and by inequity I mean they're not representing the average person in this country, our elected officials and our cultural leaders, now we're busy saying, oh, based on your skin color, you have inherent sin. And that's wrong. Are there advantages to being white? Of course. Are there advantages to being black? Yes. For example, I would say that yes, the numbers are true, that you are more likely to be shot by a police officer if you're black than white. Now, having said that, there's a very slim chance of that, okay? And most of the time, not all, but most of the time, there are things you could credibly do that would avoid the situation escalating to that. But let's say that you want to apply for college. Are you more advantaged to be white or black? Well, you're more advantaged to be black. For example, at Harvard, your SAT score could be hundreds of points lower than that of a white, but you'll be accepted in. Affirmative action is discriminatory against the groups that it doesn't benefit, because the amount of people that could get into these universities is zero sum. And so if there's 1,000 seats to be filled, and you give affirmative action to people based on their race, you have inherently discriminated people from the other race that otherwise would have gotten in. Now, I challenge you, if this country is systemically racist, point to me to the policy that is designed to benefit white people. There is none. If you show me that law, I will join you in opposing it. in the political realm. They want us to pretend that if you're a woman or if you're black, that somehow that harms your chances politically. That's not true. You might be less likely to get in politics if you're one of those groups, but if you do get into politics, it's a net benefit. Are there a few people that won't vote for you because you're black or you're a woman? Maybe. But there are far more people that will vote for you because of it. And I'll give you an example. In 2019, I ran in the special election in Pennsylvania District 12 for Congress. The way the process worked was there was basically 24 of us running. They immediately went from 24 to the top 10, which I was in. And then all the people that were out, because there was only conferees were voting, so there was basically only 205 voters. They all talked to each other. And they said, okay, the people that voted for me, I want to give those votes to this candidate. There was, in a Republican, the most Republican district in Pennsylvania, there was serious conversation going around from some of the candidates who were out. We need to back a woman. I said, why? Well, because that'll be advantageous to us against the Democrats if we have a woman. There was not one person saying we can't vote for a woman. Not one. But there were many people saying we need to vote for a woman. Now, having said that, my preferred choice other than me, at least top 3, was a woman. And I thought most of the women that ran did very good. But it wasn't because they were women. It was because their ideas were good. But we have to pretend the opposite is true. This is in the most Republican district in Pennsylvania. And people were saying we have to vote for a woman. But we have to pretend, if you're a woman, that's a disadvantage politically. No, it's not. Same's true of being black. Why do you think there was such enthusiasm, which I don't even blame, for Barack Obama being the first black president? Of course. If you were in that black community and you lived through the civil rights movement, it would be a big deal. I don't begrudge that. But we have to pretend that the opposite is true. Oh, this is a racist country. The reason Donald Trump was elected was because a bunch of people that voted for Obama switched and voted for Trump. But those people supposedly became racist after voting for Obama, please. So this idea of the original sin and like looking at different groups like they're somehow responsible, they're oppressor and oppressed, is just wrong. And it leads to bigotry. And we could see that. So much so that I could say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that at least with the people in cultural power, it is celebratory to be black and it's shameful to be white. And by the way, that affects every other race as well. Why are they left out of the conversation? So we talk about the sins of 200 years ago to justify bigotry today. Oh, well, you have to be for Black Lives Matter. And we get, if you want to focus on, systemic poverty or something, white people are all privileged. What do you think? What's that do to the psyche of the poor white person? Well, you're privileged. I can't afford to feed my family. Oh, you must really suck, man. Not only are you poor, but you're privileged, and you couldn't even use your privilege to get out of poverty. What a loser. It's ridiculous. And again, I'm not saying this to defend, poor white people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, once you start playing this racially divisive game, it has unintended, or, to many people, intended consequences. If the goal is, at the end of the day, to end racism, which will never happen. It will never happen. But the best we can do is constantly strive to that, to end racism. Then the best thing to do is focus as little as possible on race. Race relations were at an all-time high in this country before Obama came in. What changed? Well, all of a sudden we started focusing on race. Everything was about racism. And then, predictably, once the establishment and the people in power did that, what do you think it did? It caused racial division, amongst others. Now, Jim Crow and slavery and all this stuff supposedly directly impacts communities today, black communities today. Well, let's look at that. The first question, if someone tells you that, to ask is the black community better off today than it was at the end of the civil rights movement? I asked this question in the debate I did the other day. The hilarious part is they don't know. The people can't tell you. They're like, well, they said yes. Okay, if the answer is yes. So if it's true, for example, in the 60s, violence was incredible. Homicide rates were incredible. It was horrific. We have been trending downwards. There's a little bump a year and there. But with violent crime, we've been trending downwards in almost every statistic for decades. And that includes violence from the police. Now, there's been a slight uptick when? Well, after the Ferguson effect. And after we started focusing on race. When we demonized police officers and then police officers said, fine, then we're not going to go into communities like inner city Baltimore. And then homicide spiked 90%. By the way, that's a preview of what you're going to see when we abolish the police. Except it'll be even crazier. But that's what will happen. The very communities that these elite liberal people are speaking and trying to help will suffer mass casualties as a direct result of these policies. But trust them, they care about these communities. So if things are getting better, why the need for radical change? Now, in many aspects, the truth is things are not getting better. For example, wealth inequality from the black community to others, particularly the elite, is continually to increase. Incarceration rates aren't getting much better. Drug use, things like that are crippling to communities aren't getting better. And what I think is the single most important factor in this country, two-parent households, is getting ridiculously worse. For example, I believe the year was 1962, Democratic senator named Patrick Moynihan commissioned a report. It showed that 25% of blacks were born out of wedlock, basically in single-parent households. He, a Democrat again, called this a national disgrace. And we immediately started policies to solve that. Those policies to solve that and other inequity was called the War on Poverty. So, we identified a problem. Single parenthood in the black community. And you think about it. You don't have to be a scientist or an expert to understand why that's a challenge. I know that we want to glorify single mothers. And the ones that do it and do it well are saints, don't get me wrong. But it's still preferable to have a two-parent household. Everybody knows that. We all know. But the statistics bear it out as well. If you have a two-parent household, graduate high school, and have a full-time job, your chances of going to prison, of living in poverty, etc., being involved in violent crime, all plummets. The number was 25% in 1962. We passed a policy called the War on Poverty to solve that. We've been engaged in that war on poverty for 50 plus years. And the number today is 75%. So the problem's gotten 3 times worse. Now, instead of saying, wait a minute, this solution isn't working, it's actually making the problem worse, do you think that's what the people that endorse these policies do? No, they say the exact opposite. They say, oh, this proves we need to put more into the war on poverty. Can someone explain to me why 60 years after the civil rights movement, things are worse in the black community to the point of we need riots, we need to move the powers of systemic injustice in this country? 60 years after the civil rights movement? Why does it seem to be that the further we get from slavery, the more slavery is blamed? No one has an answer. Well, it gets worse. And when you start to look, you're like, well, what's going on? And they'll say things like, well, predatory lending, redlining. So, redlining was made illegal in the night. Redlining was basically that you had different mortgage options for blacks than whites, was the argument. But as always, the problem looked at this, and if you look at the underlying statistics, it's not really as it seems. So the problem was wealthy whites, which disproportionately made up the group, actually did benefit in the way that's being said. But poor whites also were the victim of redlining. So the crux of the problem wasn't racial, it was poverty. But again, when you say, no, it was just racial, then you leave out the people that were also affected that weren't of that race. I think, and I get sick and tired, and here's something that I hope if you take nothing else from this, take this. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. Don't. You might be wrong. Look at yourself in the mirror. Are you a racist? I'm not. So I don't care when people call me a racist. I did this debate the other day, and the one person was implying that I was a racist or I didn't care about black people or something. And whatever. I wasn't having it. And then I checked his show out later, and his comment was that I'm suspect. I guess implying that maybe I'm some sort of white supremacist. All I can tell you is I have over 2.5 years of material on YouTube. I challenge you to find one thing I've ever said that would remotely give the idea that I'm a white supremacist. I'm not. And so I don't take the accusation seriously. I significantly care about the problems in the black community. I do. I just have a different solution. You might disagree with me, but that doesn't make me a racist. You just think I'm dumb then. I think the more we focus on problems of race, even if it was true, even if your argument is true that systemic racism somehow is responsible for all the ills in these communities, even if that's true, isn't the important part solving it? And every time we focus more on the racial aspect, every single time things get worse. Every time. Every time. Yes, it was appropriate to focus on those things during the civil rights movement, but that's because we literally had racist policies. Even in the debate I did with this Twitch streamer Destiny, who's a left-wing person, he says, yes, they're not protesting actual racist politician or actual racist cops. The argument is the system itself is racist. But what that means is they can't point to a racist law. They just say the system has been set up historically to benefit white people. That's the argument. But they can't point to a specific racist law that's on the books today. That's the difference with the civil rights movement. You could point to actual racist and racist laws. That's what the idea of being forced to sit in the back of the bus and having colored-only buildings and facilities. That was racism. I support fighting that. But that stuff doesn't exist today. So we just say, well, all the problems are based on it. Shouldn't the argument be solving this? It's not making the situation better. All it does is cause division, and the very people responsible. Again, all of these situations occurred in democratic cities. Every one of these shootings and riotings, and they're almost all in democratic cities. Now, I'm not saying this to be political, though I am. I admit my bias. I'm Republican. Though, if you listen to me, I complain about them quite often as well. But I say Democrat to mean this, not as a political party, but to give you an idea. If you're a Democrat and you're elected to a position of power in a city, you probably, I would say there's a 99% chance at some point talked about the importance of solving inner city issues in the black community. So it's not as if this is a bunch of people being elected that are like, we don't care about black people, we don't care about the inner city. If you're being elected in those cities, you're at least saying you care about them. Yet all these things are so bad there. How is that the case? Well, then when you talk to these leaders, they all say, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter and systemic racism. You're part of that system. How can Barack Obama decry systemic racism when he was the head of it? What did you do to change things? And please, I don't want to hear he couldn't do it on his own. Legally, he wasn't allowed to spy on Trump on his own, but he accomplished that. And his IRS was going after conservative groups on their own, and he decided on his own to not enforce immigration laws. So if racism was such the big issue, even if he couldn't unilaterally declare or change law, couldn't he at least point out the systems that were racist? Oh, but he couldn't do that somehow. Maybe it was his attorney general was racist. Oh wait, they were both black. Huh. It makes no sense. And it's a cop-out. Anytime you say all of the problems of the world could be blamed on X, you're probably wrong. It's too simplified. Even saying systemic poverty is too simplified. Yes, I think that that's the most important central factor. But that's certainly not all there is. This might blow your mind, but even if you're born poor and in terrible situations, 99% of us still have personal agency. We should still be held accountable for the decisions we make. And that's something you see trying to be erased by people on the other side of the ledger. Like you could see, there are articles, people saying, well, you can't really blame pedophiles. That's how they were born. No, I'm sorry. We could blame them. If you were born and you can't help the fact that you're attracted to children, then go seek help. Go to a psychiatrist. Do what you can. But to act like that should be normalized, or that, well, serial killers are born that way, ridiculous. That doesn't mean we as a society, even if it was true, have to accept that. We don't. Because the harm to society is so great that we reject it. The same is true of people that commit homicide. And so the fact that we have to act like, well, the only reason that the black community is committing 50% of homicide is systemic racism. It's not each individual murderer's fault. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And this mentality permeates through everything. The people I was debating the other night, they literally believe, this is what they told me, at least 3 of them. Every single riot, every single one we saw in the past 2 weeks, every single one was the result of the police engaging in violence first. Not because George Floyd was killed. That's not what they're talking about. They're saying, let's say there was a riot in Philadelphia. That riot would not have happened. That was entirely peaceful people. There was no one out there that would have done anything illegal or wrong. They were completely peaceful until at some point, some cop with a big chaw in his mouth was like, I'm going to shoot some tear gas at these guys. That's ridiculous. Think of the implications of what they're saying. So you're a peaceful person. I'm holding a sign. Black Lives Matter. Justice for George Floyd. Bam, tear gas comes at me and I'm like, oh my God, tear gas. I know. I'm going to go rob a store and beat the shop owner near to death. That's what these people believe. That's the lack of personal agency that they've given to these people. That's bigotry. Oh, you can't be held accountable for your choices because you're just one of those poor black people. And by the way, it's a mistake to assume they're all black people. Many of the rioters I've seen are whites that don't live in the community. Yeah, it's all written off as, they were all peaceful until the cops acted. These people literally believe if there wasn't a police presence in places like inner city Chicago, then the murders would just dry up. Sure, there'd be a few, but after a year or two, there'd be hardly any murders left. It's insane. It denies reality. Now, let me talk for a minute. This is another discussion. So we could talk. I am going to, in good faith, I promise you, try to bring someone on my channel that endorses the idea of systemic racism and have a conversation with them to present both sides of the argument. And I promise you that I will engage cordially with them. I'm not going to dismiss them as some evil person. I will have a good faith conversation with them. I think that having conversations is the crux of how we begin to solve the problem. I'm not going to dismiss someone because they disagree with me. But I can tell you this, blaming everything on systemic racism will never, ever, ever make the situation better. It will just create division, even if you have the best intended consequences. It will create division. It'll create more of a barrier between racial groups. Here's the truth. You want to know my solution? Here's the truth. Injustices have occurred in the past. They've occurred to specific races. They've occurred to specific genders. They've occurred to specific sexualities. They've occurred to specific religions. What we can do right now as a society to make things as best as possible, if you as an individual has suffered bigotry, we will help you. We will do what we can to make that right. If it was your ancestors, I'm sorry, there's nothing we could do. Every single time we focus on that and go back to the sins of the past, we end up rewarding or blaming or giving someone moral credibility or call someone immoral based on sins or praises of the fathers. And we learned in our culture and society that that is horrific. When you don't do that, that's how you end up like things like, for example, when Milosevic stood, I can't remember exactly a lot about this situation, but I remember reading a book about this. When he slaughtered the Kurds, you know what the first thing he did was? He went to the site of this 600-year battle. And he planted a flag and he said, finally we have our revenge. We will get our revenge. Is that what we want the world to be? People rifling through, 3,000 years ago, my people were abused by these people. Now I'm justified to use violence. Your system of power needs to be removed because of that action. I had people say this. The cops, that's systemic racism. So violence is justified. Again, I can't believe how many people were saying violence is justified. A Monmouth poll said 54% of Americans thinks violence is justified. Ipsos said 22%. And granted, polls are crap, but I could just tell you anecdotally, people that I consider moderate Democrats are cheering for the riots. Or if not cheering, saying at least they're justified, regrettable but justified. It's insane. But they say, oh, well, you know, at least, and this was the take I heard from everyone I debated. Okay, maybe looting a shop owner or beating a shop owner is unjustified, but attacking the police and government buildings is justified because the police are systemically racist against the black community. But if that's the sort of broad generalizations you're going to make, couldn't the police officers be sitting around going, geez, as police officers, we had 89 people murdered last year. Disproportionately, they were murdered more by black people per capita. Therefore, we're being attacked by black people, so we have the right to fight back. Would you say the police have the right to say that? A black man's 23 times more likely to kill a white man or commit violence against a white man than vice versa. Does that mean white people are justified to attack against blacks? No! There are underlying reasons for all these statistics. Oversimplifying it and saying, I choose revenge on an entire group of people is always wrong. And always makes the situation worse. But these people that are saying, oh, you know, the looting and stuff's justified, this infuriates me. If you're listening to me and you feel that the violence is justified, please, 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 post your address online, let these people know where you live, and let them burn down your house and take all of your possessions and beat you and your spouse while they're at it. Like they did in Rochester to that couple. It's justified, right? Oh, what you mean is you support it as long as you could virtue signal, and it's not your community. Isn't it ironic that they're cheering not for Martha's Vineyard, right? Not for Hollywood Heights or anything. No, they're not cheering for them to be burnt down. They're cheering for the inner cities to be burnt down. Now we see after things like the Watts riots, after things like the Rodney King riots, these communities, it takes years to get back on their feet after these sorts of heinous riots. But no one cares about that. You got to stand on Facebook and say, yay, I support this. And your life goes on. It's those communities that suffer. But I'm the one who doesn't care about black people, apparently. I did a short video, right? And I've been having discussions with this. And it's funny to me that people don't even get it. They don't get it. I said, if you're white and you believe in systemic racism, here's what we should do. Next year, we should change the tax forms. You do your taxes, you put in your W-2, your yearly earnings, you do the exact same form. Then, at the end of it, it says, are you white? And if you click yes, you move on to the next box. And the next box says, do you believe that you're the beneficiary of systemic racism? And if you check yes, 50% of your money is taken by the federal government and goes directly into minority communities. Now, the pushback I got from this is, oh, well, I should, that's ridiculous. The government shouldn't force people. I agree. Affirmative action, the war on poverty, all of that was taking... You do know that tax money is the money that Americans put into the pool, right? It's not imaginary. That's wealth. Even if they're printing the money, that's devaluing the value of our dollars as Americans. And so that's taking our wealth. So when we have affirmative actions or war on poverty policies, or, for example, the Minneapolis mayor's requesting $40 million because he let his city burn to ashes and now he wants the federal government to bail him out, that's us. That's everyone paying for it. Not just white people, black people, Asian people, everyone who pays taxes in this country. Hispanic people, whatever. So we are currently being forced to pay for this stuff. So my suggestion is, instead of forcing everyone, why not just let the people that think that their wealth is ill-gotten? Let them pay for it. They could choose. My guess is that all this polling and all this virtue signaling you see with everyone on Facebook, all these white people saying, oh, I'm ashamed to be white. Oh, systemic racism. You just don't understand systemic racism. I'll bet when they have to put their money where their mouth is, all of a sudden the tune will change. What do you think the percentage? Because that'd be the next step. Then the IRS will say, by the way, of white people that were asked this question, this percentage of them said that there was systemic racism. And I'll bet that's a real low number. When there's no consequences, when you can say, sure, there's systemic racism. Now I'm going to keep sipping my Starbucks coffee and go back to my gated community. Sure, it's easy to say it. But when you have to put something at stake, all of a sudden, oh. I saw this Dinesh D'Souza one time. He's on a college campus and he's talking about this. And this white kid's like, yeah, it's systemic racism here in college. And Dinesh says, do you have a scholarship? And the kid says, yes. And he says, why don't you give it up to a minority student? Well, I don't want to do that. Why not? You admit that it was stolen from that minority student. You have benefited, and thereby the minority student has been aggrieved and been harmed by a system that has unfairly propped you up. So, if you believe that, then give away your unfair advantage. And I've gotten pushback over and over from people on the left from this idea. Oh, that's ridiculous. Why should we have to do it? Well, here was one. I do give money to the black community. Great, have you given enough? What percentage of your wealth was gained based on white privilege? How do we codify that? What's the number? Because that's the claim they're making. All of this crime, all of the bad stuff that occurs in the black community is because of systemic racism. And therefore, if we just change systemic racism, if we knock down the pillars of white supremacy, everything would be solved. So if you're agreeing with that, if you're saying, yes, systemic racism, you're on a computer right now chatting to me. That seems like wealth that's not necessary for your survival. You should make enough to have an apartment, to eat every day, to pay your bills, and other than that, nothing. Because it's all been gained over racism. Or are you saying, yes, I agree that there is systemic racism, but I like it. I like my wealth. Is that what you're saying? Every single one of these people that you see putting on Facebook, and I have tons of friends that are doing it. Oh, yeah, systemic racism and Black Lives Matter, and you're just wrong if you're not endorsing this message. You know what they're doing? Nothing. Worse than that, they're doing worse than nothing. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. Oh, crazy right-winger Rob thinks this. Go listen to someone like Slavoj Žižek, postmodernist. He talks about this. There is currency in victimhood. Jordan Peterson talks about this, right? Think of the irony of this. You have video after video you could see, particularly in 2015, 2016, of people at Harvard, at Yale, at Brown, all of the most prestigious universities in our country, right? And they're all shouting about privilege. Dismantle privilege. People are privileged. Dismantle white supremacy. The idea of privilege, unnecessary privilege. Now, if you got into Harvard or Yale, you are amongst the most 1% privileged in this country. Period. No matter how you got in there. Being in that group, just attending Harvard or Yale, puts you in a different stratosphere. You're probably going to achieve a level of wealth that I'll never imagine. That no one in my community has. Right? Yet still, you talk about privilege. And here's the truth, right? When you get right down to it. Even being wealthy and not being wealthy. Breaking things into, the wealthy are oppressors and the poor are oppressed. Even that's too oversimplified. Because there are things that the poor community has that the wealthy don't. For example, I'm thankful that I grew up poor. Why? Because I learned a work ethic. I learned if I want something, I have to go out and work for it. A lot of wealthy people didn't have that type of upbringing, and that's a huge disadvantage. But one of the things that you get as a poor person that's cathartic is the right to complain about being a poor person. The wealthy want to take even that. The Harvard student, they're not content to just be the most privileged. They also want to take your underprivilege. So they get to claim the victimhood and the privilege. That's what your friends are doing that are posting Black Lives Matter. Woo! They ain't doing anything. They're not sharing in the struggle. They might go LARP and throw some bricks through some minority-owned business windows. But they ain't actually doing anything to help the black community. And yes, this is an overgeneralization. Maybe some of them are. Are they doing enough? This is the constant mantra of these people on the left. They think that government should step in and solve everything. Well, what happened to personal responsibility? Your claim is that you, as a white person, have benefited from systemic racism. So give up some of that wealth to the communities you're saying that you stole it from. But they won't do it. And it's not just your friends. It's Nike. They run sweatshops across the world. But they say Black Lives Matter, so everything's hunky-dory, right? Or Mitt Romney, who worked at Bain Capital and had predatory lending to all sorts of poor people. But he's out there marching for Black Lives Matter, so it's okay. Or Chase Bank, or Amazon. And the list goes on and on and on. The virtue signaling is not only heinous in its own right, but it allows cover for the very things that they're talking about to continue. And so as long as we just agree with the mantra, well, Black Lives Matter, and I'm going to take a knee, and I'll wash back people's feet. Can anyone tell me how that's solving homicides in the black community right now? Heck, even if your issue is just police brutality, how's any of that solve police brutality? None of it does. Nothing. Does Ben & Jerry's putting on their ice cream cartons Black Lives Matter? Can you explain to me how that helps? It's not a revolution if your tactics are being, and your message is being pushed by everyone in a position of power. In fact, we see the opposite, and that's what's coming. Not only will this not make things better, it's going to make the country substantially worse. So now we have to go along with this ridiculous line, defund the police. And just this line, defund the police, is indicative of everything I'm talking that's problematic with these people. It's like the term systemic racism. They don't define it. What does defund the police mean? Talk to 10 people that endorse it, they'll give you 10 different answers. Some of it I could actually get behind, which could be, well, I don't think that the police need to drive. This is what one of my friends told me. Look, you see cops driving these brand new, Chargers, Dodge Chargers around. Why can't they go back to the old Impalas? Okay, maybe I can get behind that. But I'm someone who wants to cut spending across the board. So, okay. And then it goes all the way from, would you see the head of the Minneapolis Council? They're going to abolish the police. Did you see that interview today? She's asked by the CNN anchor, what if I get my house broken into in the middle of the night? Who would I call if there's no police? And the answer was, well, that's privilege. The fact that you just thought of that. See, it's privilege to not want your house broke into. Now, of course, the Democrats, the people that are smart, see, here's the problem, and I talk about this a lot in my show as well. Do you really think when there was a battle between AOC and Nancy Pelosi that they wanted that different of things? There's one difference between Nancy Pelosi and Bernie Sanders, or Nancy Pelosi compared to people like AOC and Bernie, and that's this. See, they both want a sort of communism, of total government control over everything. They both want that. But Nancy Pelosi wants her rich friends to continue to be rich and independent and wealthy, blah, blah, blah. And Bernie and AOC, they just want to burn it all down. That's it. Other than that, they agree on everything. So what was the fight between AOC and Pelosi about? You know what it was? It wasn't that Nancy Pelosi didn't agree with all the things in the Green New Deal. It was that Nancy Pelosi knows that they, as a Democrat party that wants all of this crap, they can't tell the American people exactly how extreme they are. You remember what the architect of Obama said? That doofus, whatever his name was? Well, we had to lie to the American people because we know what's best for them. That's the Democratic Party in a nutshell. And granted, again, the establishment Republicans, a lot of them are just as bad. It's all one big club and you ain't in it, as George Carlin said. The difference is most of the Republicans are inept or cowards, and the Democrats are the face of the deep state. That's the difference. But does that make one much better than the other? Not really. This is not pre-recorded. This is me rambling live, Baloo, so thanks for being here. Yeah, and I'll get to some audience interaction here too in a bit. So, what was I talking about? I got distracted there. So, yeah, that's what we see then is with this idea of defund the police. I was talking about the radicalism of these policies. So they say defund the police. And then when you talk to them, like the mayor of Minneapolis is drummed out of a protest with thousands of people because they ask him point blank, will you abolish the police? He says no. That's not good enough for them. That's thousands of people. Yet when I do a debate and I'm like, look, they're talking about defunding the police and abolishing it. Oh, no one's seriously saying that. Really? That's not what the city council of Minneapolis is saying. That's not what all the protesters in Minneapolis said. That's not what AOC is saying. And so the Democrats and the media and everyone have to run. Belu, I'm streaming on. So for those of you that are interested, I'll just take a quick break here. I'm streaming on DLive, Twitch, YouTube, Periscope, and Facebook right now. And so I'll put links. If my mods are in here, any of them, which I don't have many. If you could put links up to those other platforms, I would really appreciate it. But basically, if you're on any of those platforms and you search Normal America, you could find me. And please share if you could. I'd really appreciate it. So thanks. So the Democrats in the media and in the professional political class, they had to come out and go, oh, no. When they say defund the police, they don't mean abolish the police. They mean take some of the money from the police and give it to, because they know. If the average American hears that, they're going to be like, even the average like Black Lives Matter, supporter, they're going to be like, wait, what? So if I'm concerned about my house getting broken into, that's white privilege? Now, do you start to see the problem with saying everything's systemically racist? Because once you accept that conclusion, it literally leads you to saying things like, oh, and if you're afraid your house is going to be broken into, that's because you have white privilege. It ignores the fact of how much violent crime happens in black communities, for starters. And secondly, how disgusting and nonsensical is that? It's ridiculous. And so they have to run cover. Oh, this is what defund the police means. It's the same with the Green New Deal. Remember the Green New Deal? It said things like, we'll pay people who don't want to work. Oh, no, they don't really mean that. It's causing racism. That's what it's doing. It's causing division between the races. When we base it on the lie, things like that people are claiming they care about police brutality will never be solved. If the argument is, well, we need to solve police, we're going to riot or we're going to protest until we stop having police kill unarmed black people for racial reasons, that's not happening in a statistically significant number. So if it's not happening and you're saying the protest won't end until it stops happening, it'll never end. And that's the truth. As long as we continue to go on this lie that all of this is because of systemic racism, these riots will happen again and again and again and again and again. Not every week, not every month, maybe not even every year. But anytime someone wants to cause division for political power, it will happen again. We have a country of over 300 million people, over 700,000 law enforcement officers. On any given month, with as many cameras and as many people as there are out there, you'll be able to find a cop doing something bad. If you want to cause division, you could selectively push that story and then control the narrative to show that this proves whatever your underlying assumption was. It proves the police are racist. So that's what we see. And we can see how it's being selectively pushed. They didn't push the case of Tony Timpa. They didn't push the case of Daniel Shaver. More unarmed whites were killed every year than unarmed blacks. They hardly talk about any of them. Why is that? Why don't they talk about the 5,000-something black people that are victims of homicide without police involvement here? Why don't they? They say we do talk about that, please. That's not true. Is it technically true that you do? Of course, probably. There are people technically talking about it. But we could see where the outrage is. We could see where the majority of effort is put. They want you to deny reality. The same people that say, oh, we're out there is equally protesting against black homicide victims as we are against the death of George Floyd. That's a lie. The same people that want you to believe that want you to believe, oh, all of these protests were peaceful until the cops got involved. Then they want you to believe, oh, the only reason these homicides occur in the first place are because the police are there. They want you to deny reality. And I've talked on this channel ever since I started it about, people are probably, that listen to me a lot, probably sick and tired of hearing me say this. The problem is, the establishment left controls the narrative. They control all of our cultural institutions of power. They control 95% of the mainstream media. That might be too high. They control a huge portion of the mainstream media. They control academia. They control Silicon Valley. They control the entertainment industry. All of that shapes our national conversation and culture. Andrew Breitbart talked about how politics is downstream of culture. While people on the right were focused on winning elections, people on the left and in the establishment were focused on winning the culture war. And they won unanimously. They crushed us. So much so that you can't publicly speak out like I am right now without fear of retribution. You can't. And I'm not saying anything controversial. I have friends that no longer want to talk to me because I came out against riots. That's how powerful controlling the narrative is. It's insane. Ask Drew Brees. Ask Drew Brees how powerful the narrative is. What was his sin? Well, I defend this flag. I think it's a great country. You can't say that. You can't say it. But we have to pretend that the establishment is against black people. Everybody in the establishment is crawling all over themselves to say, we support Black Lives. Black Lives Matter, we support you. What can we do? We'll defund the police. We'll do what? We'll kneel before you. We'll wash your feet. Whatever you want. Please just don't come after us. Because the most powerful weapon in this country right now, more powerful than the police, more powerful than our Congress people, is the cultural power that Black Lives Matter is wielding. Our government is so powerful that it convinced almost everyone in this country that they couldn't go to work, that they couldn't go in public. Many of them couldn't go to church, because if they did, millions of Americans would die. They're still pushing that. This group comes along and says, F you, we'll do what we want. And that same group that was powerful enough to tell you and all of your law-abiding friends, you can't do these things, they cower in fear. They were powerful enough to make you cower in fear, so you couldn't go out and do that stuff. And they themselves are cowering in fear of Black Lives Matter. Oh, no. You could go protest. We didn't mean you. We meant those horrible, evil people that wanted to go to church or that wanted to go to their job to provide for their community and their family. Those are the evil, horrible people. So just so you know where you stand, law-abider, you're right here in the bottom. And then you have your government and law enforcement above you, but then way above them is Black Lives Matter and the ideology behind it. That's where the power is. That's why I talk all the time about the need to fight back. Where are your Republicans? Where are they? Where are our Republican leaders? Where is anyone in a position of leadership? I've called Donald Trump out over and over on this channel. I still support Trump. I volunteered for him. I got offered a job by them, but didn't take it. But I heavily criticize his actions on Syria, his deficit spending, particularly his actions endorsing lockdowns on COVID. But I'll say this, I don't know if he handled this situation perfectly. There were mistakes, I think. But at least he's trying. I have friends of mine, people I consider smart, good people, happen to be on the left. They didn't have word one to say about de Blasio letting his city be overran. And then after saying, I'm sorry, we just got overran, there was nothing we could do. But I refuse to accept the National Guard. They didn't say word one about that. But as soon as Trump said, then we might have to send in the military, they went nuts. Can you believe what Trump's doing? Yes, I can believe it. And no, I don't want the military sent. De Blasio wanted the military sent. The Democrats wanted it sent. Because then they could say, see, Trump's a dictator. So they let the cities burn. That's what they did. And I'm not the only one who thinks. I debated that left-wing Twitch streamer Destiny. He agreed. Yes, that's what's happening to a large extent. The riots are over politics. They want Trump removed. There you have it. Where have the rest of the Republicans been? You might get some lip service on their Twitter page. Oh, I think the riots are bad. Black Lives Matter. We need to solve systemic racism. That's what you get from the Republicans. The Democrats are full on endorsing the violence or deflecting for it or just not covering it at all, not addressing it. That's our two parties right now. And like good little sheep, we're going to go out in November and elect the Republicans again. Because yes, I guess the alternative's worse. you start to see that they don't care about you either? They're cowards. I know this. I talked to some of them. Not at the national level. I know for a fact I talked to people in Pennsylvania that are Republicans in positions of leadership that were against the lockdowns but didn't want to come out and say anything. Why? They'd be called a grandma killer. So it was left to people like me to go on and say, yeah, this is the truth. The lockdowns are terrible. Oh, by the way, guess who gets vindicated again today as the World Health Organization came out and said, turns out asymptomatic carriers of COVID really aren't much of a risk at all to spread it. So that means all of you that were told you have to wear a mask and you can't go to work even if you didn't have symptoms, that was all for nothing. Hey, isn't that great? Cool, 40 million jobs lost. And even people that didn't lose their jobs in horrible financial distress right now. $9 trillion spent. All over nothing. But where were the Republicans? This wasn't a difficult case to make. Again, what's my expertise? Do I have a background in politics? I ran for office. That's about it. I'm someone who's never made over 50,000. Well, I might have made over 50,000, but that's because I work insane overtime. For the first time in my life this year, I make over $15 an hour. And it's like $15.50 or something like that. I do home health care. I don't have connections to anyone. How can I come out? It's not like you have to be a genius. I had the right take on this. We shouldn't accept the loss of our freedoms and the destruction of our economy until the government proves that it's necessary and will save lives. They did not. They didn't even try to. They just said, you want grandma to die if you don't agree with us. How hard would it have been to come out against that? But I lost supporter after supporter. I lost people, subscribers. I lost people that would watch my channel. Why? Because, oh, well, Trump says he was for it, so then I must be wrong. Where were our leaders? Nowhere to be found. Where are they today? Imagine if a group called White Lives Matter was protesting the death of Tony Timpa, who Dallas police killed in 2016 in almost an identical way to George Floyd, except they were laughing the whole time while they did it. Now imagine if a group would have rioted through Dallas and said, White Lives Matter, Tony Timpa was killed for being a white man. How many Republican or Democrat politicians do you think would be on Capitol Hill right now today taking a knee in solidarity for White Lives Matter or saying that we need to fight systemic racism against white people? None. I had someone I was arguing with say, even if I don't think that systemic racism is the reason, would I have the nerve to walk up to a minority that lives in these cities and says, my subjective reality is that this racism plays a part in my everyday life? And I was like, yeah, I would say that to them. And you want to know why? Because I deal with people in my little town all the time that say things like this. Believe it or not, I have a lot of friends that have been to jail or prison. And I used to, as a bartender, hear this all the time. Most discriminated person in this country is the white man who's been to jail. Can't get a job because you've been to jail. There's no organizations to help you. No one says that you went to jail, but it wasn't your fault. Everyone just hates you. Now, are you going to look at them and say their subjective experience is wrong? You would say, no. Because we could point to reality and say, well, that's not, we could look at these statistics and show blah, 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 blah. So I don't want to hear about subjective realities. Does that mean racism doesn't exist? Of course not. But how many times have you watched a video, right? I've seen dozens of videos where, oh, I was affected because of racism. And then it was a hoax. Or you see a video where a woman's pulled over, a black woman's pulled over, and she instantly starts yelling at the cops, you pulled me over for being black. And then you see the cop's dash cam, and that's not what happened. Now, to that woman, her subjective experience was, I was pulled over for being black. But we could see the objective reality was, that's not true. Now, does that mean there aren't people pulled over for being black? That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying that shows you that the subjective reality is not always the truth. And so to say, if I was to talk from someone in the inner city and they told me about the problems, I would hear them out. I would certainly not make fun of them. I would not say they're wrong to feel the way they do. But I would try to tell them, like, I think if you honestly look, you would see that the reason that that's happening has more to do with you being poor than it has to do with your race. And you have to try to put yourself in the other shoes. if you're black and you live in one of these communities and you think the police are being terrible to you, put yourself in the police's shoes. How would you feel if you have to go into these war zones every day? 20-something people shot in Chicago last week. One day, that was. How'd you feel if you were police in that community? You get paid like crap. The entire country, everyone in a position of power in the country says you're racist. Your own chief and mayor don't have your back. If you make one little mistake, not only is your life, like, are you going to lose your job, you'll lose your family, your life will be ruined, like Darren Wilson. Remember him? Hands up, don't shoot. Oh, turns out Darren Wilson did nothing wrong. But his life was ruined. So why would you be a police officer? Now, conversely, you tell the cops, put yourself in the shoes of the black people. If you're profiling black people, how would you feel if you were black and the cops were pulling you over just because of the way you look? Wouldn't feel good. But that's what you need to do. Empathize with both sides. When you just say one side's racist or you say this side's just a bunch of animals because of the race, nothing's going to get solved. You know, I had this conversation in this debate where we talked about the idea of profiling and things like that. Why do we only care about this stuff when it's racial? We don't care about gender profiling. Let's do a little experiment. Let's assume you're in law enforcement and I come through on the scanner and I say this. We have reports of a break-in. Someone smashed a window and stole a bunch of televisions out of a house on Broad Street. No description of the perpetrator. What just came into your mind when I told you that? How's that person look? Or people that broke in there? I'll bet two of the things they probably look like was men and young. You didn't picture an old woman, did you? Why is that? Because most of these crimes are committed by young men. So do we say it's wrong to profile them? Maybe it is. Maybe it's not a good thing that that stereotype popped into your head. But you can't control that. And here's the sad reality of human nature. You will never be able to control that. Ever. You will always have stereotypes. Always. I've never been to China. I have an idea of what China looks like. I remember one time I was talking to a friend of mine when I was in the debate community, and he was from Algeria, I believe. Real nice guy. Still one of the nicest people I've ever met. And we got stuck in an airport, and so we're sitting there for 2 hours, nothing to do. And he just starts talking to me. He's like, what does Algeria look like to you, Rob? And I was like, desert, maybe palm tree here and there. And he starts showing me pictures of his hometown in Algeria. It's gorgeous. Green as could be. Beautiful. Green place. These beautiful, apparently you had, Alexander the Great came through. You had all these, Greek sculptures that were in his hometown. It was a beautiful place. I was wrong. My stereotype, it's this country in Africa, this is what I was wrong. Does that mean I'm a terrible person? No. We stereotype about things all the time. You see a really tall, muscular-looking person, you probably assume they're probably good at basketball or they're athletic. Maybe not. Maybe they're actually, I'm an engineer. I don't even work out. I was just built this way. But I'm terrible at sports. Okay. Should we try to alleviate ourselves of stereotypes? Yeah, but inevitably they'll exist. So why do they exist? And then the more important question is, how do we act based on those stereotypes? The problem's not having the stereotype, especially because that's inevitable. Yes, we could focus on how to end that stereotype, but in human history, we haven't came up with a solution to that. So the next best thing, and actually the best thing, is training people to not act unjustly based on stereotypes. That's the key, but then we need to get to real world solutions. How do we do that? There's plenty of things. Mandatory body cameras. Civilian oversight of police. Making sure that police that do crimes are brought to justice. Better training, more staffing, more police in these communities. Better relationships with citizens of these communities. Maybe getting rid of some things like drug crimes. so that you have a better rapport with these communities. All of that stuff could be potential. There could be problems with all that too. But at least these are problems that you could look at instead of just being like, well, cops are racist. That's the problem. Cops are racist. It's all systemic racism. Again, I go back to this. Last Monday, Rush Limbaugh has Charlemagne the God on, who's like from Black Lives Matter. He says, look, I found this murder of George Floyd to be heinous. What can we do? Give us real world solutions. And Charlemagne the God says, dismantle the systems of white supremacy. What does that mean? How does that help the thousands of homicide victims in the inner city? A lot of times there is truth behind stereotypes. And not all stereotypes are negative. Like, for example, did you know there's an insane disproportion of people of Samoan heritage that play professional sports? Just really athletic people. Does that mean you get an idea? If someone says, my boyfriend's Samoan, you'd be like, oh, probably like a big dude, right? Throw some stuff around. Maybe you meet him and he's not, But that's a stereotype. There are negative stereotypes as well. Here's a negative stereotype. You ready for this one? All white people are evil. All white people have benefited from racism. But some reason that stereotype's okay. White supremacy, by the way, Sax, right? Like, it doesn't even make sense because the terms matter. And so if it's a system of white supremacy and the argument is, well, blacks can't achieve because the system is set up, it's systemic white supremacy. In other words, all of our systems have been built to benefit white people and to make white people superior. That's clearly not true. For example, we have systems, right? Institutions in this country that is part of the systemic portion. When they say systemic racism, right? Or systemic white supremacy, the systemic portion of it means our institutions are systematically, right? What does systemic mean? Well, we have Congress, and we have the police. But we have more systems than that. We have Hollywood, we have the entertainment industry. And before you say that doesn't matter, it does. It influences millions of people. What the celebrities think, a lot of people think. Maybe not you, but that's true. The mainstream media, also a system, an institution. Social media, Silicon Valley, also an institution. Academia, also an institution. Every one of them is dominated the other way. So much so that if you're at the Philadelphia Inquirer and you just say, hey, you should stop burning down buildings, you get fired. If you're a Republican senator that agrees with 58% of this country and says, if these riots continue, maybe the military needs to go in, you are said to have engaged in violence against the other writers at the New York Times. That's insanity. So I'm going to keep going here, at least for another half hour. But this is the time of the show with a half hour to go. I will ask for your support. And here's some ways you can support me. So one, I don't know if I have any mods in here, but if you have any mods, if you could put the links up to my other sites. But basically, if you look for me at Normal America on YouTube, on DLive, on Twitter, and Twitter I'm actually Nor Robert, just my last name and first name. You can look me up on Facebook, but I don't use it much. I do broadcast there. And on DLive. So DLive, here's the big ones. DLive, YouTube, and Twitch. Normal America with Rob Noor. If you could subscribe to me on all three of those platforms, that would be great. If you could like and share my stuff, I'd be really appreciative. I'm going to try to be putting out like 2-minute videos just with real, fast takes on issues almost every day. So you could look for those. Places like YouTube don't really do much for me. On DLive, if I can get up to 300 subs, I could start posting those videos there. So maybe a reason to subscribe to me on there. And then you could always support me on Patreon or PayPal, which I will put those links up real quick. I'm trying my best to increase my channel, the reach of my channel, things like that. I think that I have a good message. I hope people appreciate it. By the way, I'm not leaving. I still got a half hour left, but I just wanted to do this before the very end because if I wait, I'll forget. But yeah, good night to anyone who's leaving. But yeah, I'd really appreciate the financial support because one, I am a broke person, and second, the more support I get, the more it could go into my channel, better equipment, Me being able to put more time, I work 80, 90 hours a week as it is, so more money means I can put it more into the channel. If you don't have money, don't worry. I'm still going to do the channel. Don't worry about anything like that. Also, if you donated, if you're on DLive and gave lemons, or if you gave me anything on Twitch, because I'm on Restream, I don't know that I can see that. So anyone who donated to me today, please, thank you so much. And if you just type in the chat, I donated money to you, I'll give you a shout out. But the way my little chat thing works, I can't see that. So yeah, thank you for my donation. So police unions we're talking about. Yeah, I mean, police unions do protect a lot of these people. And it is something that we need to do a better job of fixing. I agree with that. I mean, that's a real world solution. That's not what this is about. And it's about a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but it all comes down to power. Do I agree with the idea of tabula rasa, or do I think that some groups cannot be compromised with? So tabula rasa means clean slate. It's Latin for clean slate. So do I think that we should approach everything with a clean slate? Governmentally, yes, to a degree. Like if you're a terrorist organization, I don't think we're like, let's wipe the slate clean. But yeah, what we need to do as a government when it comes to our laws, we can't look at sins of the past, because once you say, well, this group sinned in the past, then the next group will say, what about that group? And so we can't govern that way. So the way I look at it is, for example, take the conversation of reparations. We had some interned Japanese Americans that actually did receive reparations from the government. But the reason they got reparations is because they were the ones who were actually interned unjustly. We did not give reparations to the ancestors of those people. I feel the same about slavery. If we start to talk about reparations, all you do is make one people responsible for the sins of their fathers. So in that sense, I do believe in tabula rasa like that. Now, as individuals, it's hard to live exactly like that. But as much as possible, we should. If someone aggrieves you personally, then maybe it's hard to wipe the slate clean. But Black Smoke says, things are on DLive. Things are heading towards vigilante times. It's the Wild West coming with what they're proposing. Yeah, and I mean, so let me go through a conversation I had with my friend Tom. Tom is a Democrat, was very upset that Trump suggested sending in the military. Well, here was the thing. The best solution would have been, for example, de Blasio in New York. If de Blasio would have allowed his police force to deal with the riots, that was the best solution. The next best solution was to allow the National Guard in to deal with it. But de Blasio didn't do either of those things. So that left us with three possibilities. Either one, you just leave rioters loot and riot anytime they want, and they can burn down the city of New York if they want. Or two, we send the military in to try to stop it. Or three, vigilantes will eventually stop it. And that third option is going to be the bloodiest. And that's what they're pushing for. I made a video where I said this. It didn't get a lot of attention, but here's the thing. They want you totally disarmed. That's what they want. They don't agree with the Second Amendment. They don't think you should have the right to protect yourself. Then they say the police are racist and the police should stand down and allow the rioting and looting and whatever this can. In fact, in many cases, the police should be defunded or disbanded. But they also don't believe that the National Guard should be allowed to come in and help. In other words, you are defenseless. And again, what did I say? De Blasio wanted his city to burn because it was going to try to force Trump's hand to send in the military. Then the Democrats could say, see, Trump's a dictator. And I gave this example. Watch one of these riots. Anyone, watch them. And I don't mean from CNN or Fox News. Find someone who's on the street at the riot filming, okay? And you'll see this footage within 10 minutes, any given one you watch, guaranteed. You'll see a line of police, and then you'll see protesters or rioters screaming, spitting, throwing, whatever, at all the police, right? That'll be going on. And then eventually the police will announce, this is unlawful, disperse. And then they'll wait 5 minutes, and then they'll shoot tear gas, and they'll disperse them. The same tough people that were yelling and screaming and throwing stuff at the police will all of a sudden go, I'm a victim, police brutality, did you see what they did? Oh my God. That's what they'll do. That's a metaphor for exactly how they operate. Cry bullies. This is what they do. It's what the Democratic Party does all the time. They force terrible thing after terrible thing after terrible thing on you. And then when you fight back, they say, see, you're a bad person. They'll call Trump supporters every name in the book. CNN will, but then they'll bring on Rick Wilson that says you're a 10-toothed rube who hates the brown horde trying to get into this country. That's a guest that's repeatedly on CNN, supposedly a Republican, Rick Wilson. So they'll call you that, but then when CNN sends one of their reporters out, Jim Acosta, out to a Trump rally, they can't believe the stuff that Trump supporters are saying to them. They'll spy on Trump illegally, but then when Trump wants to investigate the illegal spying on him, they say, well, that's being a dictator. You can't do that. Now, let's not forget, while we're talking about, here's another example I bring up all the time. You remember the rise of anti-Semitism in New York? You remember hearing about this? It was a big thing. Right out of the gate, when it started, I remember hearing about it in like 2017. Anti-Semitism's on the rise. Donald Trump got elected and anti-Semitism's on the rise. Remember? You were hearing this? New York City, oh man, anti-Semitic attacks are up. And then all of a sudden you stopped hearing about it. What happened? The attacks are still going on. They're increasing. You know what happened? It ain't Trump supporters. It's people from Farrakhan, Louis Farrakhan's group, the Nation of Islam. That's who's doing it. And when they shot up, a member of them shot up that Jewish deli there 6 months ago or so, I read this quote from a rabbi there. And he said, here's the deal. These attacks keep coming, but de Blasio doesn't care because they're from people that share his political beliefs. And so inevitably what will happen is we in our Jewish community will defend ourselves. And then the police will crack down on us, just like they did with the Proud Boys. That's what this rabbi said. And he's right. That's what they do. You want to go have a peaceful march for Trump? They'll encourage Antifa-type people or left-wings to beat you, punch you, do whatever. And they'll say, oh, it's all peaceful, it's all peaceful. But as soon as a Trump supporter swings back, all of a sudden it's, look at how violent the Trump supporters are. Oh, my goodness. They want you defenseless. That's what they want. And then when you've had enough and you shoot back, you're the bad guy. They'll say, see, send in the police. And I'll guarantee you, like, for example, let's say in New York City, this would keep occurring. And a bunch of people, it won't just be one shop owner. What'll happen is you'll get communities that'll come together and they'll say, enough's enough. We're getting 30, 40 people together. We're all arming ourselves. And when these people come and try to riot and loot, we're just going to blow them away. I don't want to see that happen. That's why I'm trying to use dialogue. I'm against this sort of violence. But when that happens, every media outlet will go, see, we knew it. These racists that are against Black Lives Matter, they're violent thugs. And de Blasio will send the police in. They're not going to treat you as merciful as they treated the rioters if you're defending your stuff. Oh, no. They'll come at you with the full force of the law. Just like, go ahead, go out to your job right now. Open your place of business tomorrow. De Blasio will send the police to lock you up in a heartbeat. But if you want to go burn down your shop in the name of Black Lives Matter, then that's cool. Yes, Carvo, there will be people, as someone with European ancestry, that will always look at us as eternal oppressors. There will be those people. But it's our job to realize, hey, thanks, Iron Crane, I appreciate it. My curtains, yeah. Again, this is my work office. If you're wondering why I do the show so late, I work till 10:30, 11, so this is when I'm off the clock. When I go to work, I do 24/7, so I have to stay here, so. The curtains are not mine. I have no choice in them. But yeah, that'll happen. There will always be people that look at us as oppressors, but we can't give in. That sort of thing only matters if you give in to it. When you apologize to the mob, you are now subservient to the mob. If you have enough confidence in yourself to know what's in your heart, then these attacks mean nothing. Yes, right now they have the cultural power. That's absolutely true. But we win by fighting back against the lie. And if we don't, then it's the end of our civilization. So that's what we see. Any other specific questions? So I got like 15 minutes. That's what I see going on. You know, I did a video that got a lot of play on Twitter. It's a 2-minute video you can check out my YouTube channel, and it just basically says this. We cannot survive as a country if we keep electing leaders that hate this country. If we elect people that think that the U.S. is a racist, sinful place, and that we need to correct that, the U.S. cannot survive. And that's what we've been doing. Let's see. Check out some of these. Patriot says, funny, they only want police if they're on their leash. Well, that's, of course. When I run for Congress in 2022, I'm going to suggest disbanding the FBI. Why do they like the FBI? Why do they like the CIA, the Democrats? Isn't it funny? The same people that told us, you can't criticize the FBI because that harms law enforcement, are now saying, defund the police. The police are systemically racist. The exact same people. The same people on CNN and MSNBC. You couldn't criticize the FBI being used as a weapon by the Obama administration. Couldn't criticize that or it was harming law enforcement. But police are racist, defund the police. Why is that? Because they control the FBI. They control the CIA. Or rather, the FBI and CIA control them, or it's mutual, would be a fair way of putting it. Because they're all just part of the same deep state. Carvo says it's past the point of return. I don't know. I don't think it is. I think that what you'll see is this will go on. Trump may lose. We could be in a really dark 6 to 8 years. But eventually people will see that they've been lied to. Crime will go through the roof. All of this crap will happen. And then we'll see if the pendulum swings the other way. I don't know. All I know is this. I'm not great at making that sort of prediction, which side will win. I'll tell you this. I'm not going to give up the fight. I'm not going to resort to endorsing a civil war or something, or violence. I'm still committed to engaging in dialogue and sharing ideas. I'm still going to run for office. I'm still trying to hold my leaders' feet to the fire. All owned by Red Shield. Is anybody watching on Twitch, by the way? If you're on Twitch, can you just say hi real quick? I got one person. I don't know if you all use Twitch. I'll just talk about it real quick. I always thought it was just for video games. But apparently there's like a lot of politics stuff that goes on there. So I'm also trying to expand my Twitch channel. So if y'all would consider subscribing to me over there, I would really appreciate that. They want to disarm the public, promise police protection, then disarm the police. It's a brown shirt policy. Yeah, I agree. And it could happen. We may lose. Look, you ask people that have been watching my channel. I've been talking for months. Everyone's saying Trump's going to win on a landslide. I said, never underestimate their corruption. And now we're seeing it. They're cheering for riots. You know? If you think, let me ask you this. True, like real talk here for a second. If you believe they lied about COVID, they did. And if you believe that they're excusing or deflecting for riots and trying to say people are evil based on the skin color, they're doing that. What makes you think they're above stealing an election? Engaging in voter fraud? What makes you think they're beyond that? Of course they're not. And so I hear people saying, oh, these riots are good for Trump. People are going to get fed up. Maybe. Maybe it won't matter. Maybe they'll just steal the election. And then all of a sudden, you'll hear the same Democrats. Remember, they said Trump and his supporters won't accept the results of the election. And then Trump won, and they said, we don't accept the results of the election. Then they'll go right back to if Biden wins. You have to accept the results, even though they have it for 4 years. We have a finite amount of time. People like us are decreasing demographically. I come from the standpoint where I believe that demographics are destiny, says Carvo on YouTube. I can understand thinking that. I can. But here's the thing. Here's what I think people miss. The demographics, even if they change when it comes to racially, I think that we'll start to see an increase in people in these other demographics start to switch more ideologically like us anyways. So let me give you an example. Hispanic community is growing, right? You think the Hispanic community is going to accept, well, police all hate black people, so therefore no police? And then if they start to have problems in their communities, they'll say, oh, well. I don't. I think you could already see legal immigrants are starting more and more to have conservative values. I don't know if it's enough or how long it'll take. I don't know. All I could do is look at myself in the mirror and stick by my principles. I am not going to be someone who says that my skin color matters that much to me. I'm not. My ideas matter, and I'm fighting for those ideas. That's just who I am. I think that I'm right. I think that my ideas are right. I don't think that my ideas are exclusionary to any demographic whatsoever. I think that the ideas of personal freedom and personal responsibility are best for each group. That's how I approach the issue. I'm offline. It says love the sex. Really? It says not. I think I'm still online. Hey, thank you, someone on Twitch. Thanks. Please consider subscribing here. Right, Carbo, the Hispanics, I mean, it's an overgeneralization to say Hispanics are advocating and blacks are, everyone's advocating for their own interests. But yeah, certainly there are big groups of those. But I don't care. I'm not going to counter that by saying, well, then I only care about white people. I just don't, that's not what I'm going to do. I can't bring myself to criticize what they're doing and then saying, well, the only chance I have to survive is to play identity politics myself. I will not do that. I will not. Right, and a house divided cannot stand. That's why I won't fall into that trap. I'm going to continue to push that we need to try to overcome this tribalism. And I'll maybe fail. That's fine. I'm used to failing, but I'm going to try my damnedest, I'll tell you that. Yeah, I'm live. What are you talking about? Love the sex. No, that's cool. Yeah, did anybody have any specific questions? Well, that's another point, Jesse, that you make, or Jojo. For those of you who don't know, Jojo's my brother. Yeah, we talk about all of this craziness that goes on. Like, oh man, you would think if you just landed here from a different planet, you'd be like, oh my God, all these riots and stuff. Must be a horrible place to live, the United States. It is the best time to be alive ever right now. Let's talk real quick about the patriarchy, because I'm going to have a debate with someone soon. I think I'm lining it up about this idea of the patriarchy and intersectionality. Intersectionality is just the idea. So picture this. We talked about cultural Marxism. So you have all these groups that are oppressors or oppressed, right? And they break us up. But what do you do if, say, you're a white woman and you're talking to a black man? Who's more oppressed? This actually occurred in the debate community all the time. All the time this came up. Team would stand up and say, we're women, this country is sexist against women, vote for us to end the patriarchy. And then the next team would stand up and there's two black guys and they're like, no, the country's racist, the root of all evil is racism, vote for us to end racism. How do you decide that as a judge? You're just like, oh, okay. Like that stuff happens. So what these people did was they came up with this idea called intersectionality. Intersectionality said all the oppressed groups are in it together against. And then, like, Donald Trump's basically, this is well before Trump intersectionality came about, but Donald Trump is the avatar of what they hate. White, rich, Christian-ish, I guess. Straight. They hate all that stuff. So, he's the bad guy. We can come together because we all hate this guy. Leads to weird, like, coalitions. Like Islamic fundamentalists and the gay community. So the gay community is working with Islamic fundamentalists to overthrow the Republicans, but the Islamic fundamentalists literally want to kill the gay community. But that's intersectionality for you. So anyways, one of the arguments that I brought up on this debate panel the other day was, okay, if we could say that this country's racist because the police disproportionately affect black people, then isn't it even more sexist than racist because the police even more disproportionately affect men than women? And if so, don't the intersectionalists say that this country, the country is sexist and racist? So if men are more disproportionately affected, is it true that the feminists are wrong? And this is what the feminists told me. No. Men are also victims of the patriarchy. Well, define patriarchy. Well, it's the system controlled by men. Now, there's problems with that. Can you identify a system that's not the patriarchy? And I know you'll probably say, well, in the jungles of Brazil, there's this one village where women are in charge and everything goes great. Okay. But here's the problem even with that. They can't argue that you're born terrible. They can, some of them do, but the more sophisticated ones will say, well, you have to choose to engage in the patriarchy. You have to choose to be masculine. So you can't say, well, what about Angela Merkel? There's a country ran by a woman. Is things going great there? Well, no, that's still the patriarchy. So if that's true, why can't I make the exact opposite argument? I think everything's ran by a matriarchy. You'd be like, well, what sense does that make? It was all men. So they were acting as women. Prove me wrong. In other words, define your terms. What does patriarchy mean? And here's the problem with their argument. If that's true, if you're literally going to make the argument, well, patriarchy, and however you want to define it, it means men in systems of control. If that's your argument, I hate to tell you, now's the best time ever to be alive. So if you're going to look at the problems right now and say it's all based on the leadership, and I identify the leadership as all men, or behaving like men, well, all the good stuff then would also be resultant of that leadership. They'll say no. Everything good is the result of not patriarchy, and everything bad is the result of patriarchy. And so then what they've defined the terms are is patriarchy means bad, feminism means good. Then what's the point of the debate? Oh, I didn't know all those people left Crowder Iron Crane. I haven't watched it in a while. But, yeah, I mean, it's a crazy time. We'll see what happens. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating. We cost our country trillions of dollars with the COVID lockdown that was based on a lot. And that's what I'll end this show with. Let's talk about this real quick. Can we at least, one good thing that came out of this, the Second Amendment, more than ever, everyone should believe in, right? You believe that now. The government can't take care of you. This also is direct indictment of socialism in general, because it proves that when push comes to shove, if you rely on the government, not just for protection, but for your livelihood, they'll drop you like a bad habit. They don't care. As soon as it becomes inconvenient for them to have to take care of you, they'll no longer take care of you. Just ask any nursing home patient in Pennsylvania that Tom Wolf forced into death camps with other COVID patients. Just ask the shop owners in all these cities that rioted. Right? So we've proved that. And here's the other thing that's happened. Can we stop with this garbage lie that we need to trust the experts? When the same experts that we had to believe about the lockdown because they knew what was right are now out there saying, well, actually more deadly than COVID, a virus we said would be apocalyptic and could kill millions of people. More dangerous than that is white supremacy. What white supremacy? I mean, hell, when you get down to brass tacks and you're like, what are you actually talking about? You know what that guy Destiny I debated said? He said things like this. Well, it's like getting tickets for driving while black. I've looked up even the most left-leaning study was from CNN. And they got a poll that showed you were 13% more likely to get pulled over if you're black than white. Even if we accept that number's true, that's more of a problem than millions of deaths? Because that's what these experts said. Millions would die if we didn't lock down. But now they're supporting not locking down over these protests because you're 13% more likely to get pulled over as a black person? Or is it because 9 unarmed blacks were shot last year? Those 9 deaths are worth more than the millions? They lied to you. It was a lie. It was a lie from the beginning. And I told you that. And I got a lot of heat for it. And I didn't care. One of the nice things about having a small channel is I don't care. I don't have to worry about, if I say the wrong thing, I lose my livelihood. I don't have to worry about it. It's what's nice about being broke. I don't got much to lose. So I'll tell you the truth. You might not always agree with me, but that's the truth. They lied to you. They're still lying to you. You want to know how this is going? Governor Wolf, my governor, said that we were cowards if we wanted to go to work, and said that he would take away our license to operate, and said that he would take away funding to the counties that allowed people to go to work. And then he went out and protested with Black Lives Matter, standing next to someone holding a sign that said Blue Lives Matter. Broke his own executive order. Then when brought up on it, he said, yeah, I guess that wasn't consistent. That's what he said. Then today, when he was further asked, he was asked today by my friend Todd Bartley, who you can check it out on talkwilliamsport.com, but he does a radio show with me. He was asked today, what would you say about the state of improving race relations in the state of Pennsylvania? And you know what he said? White people need to understand that there are two Pennsylvanias, one for white people and one for black people. Does that sound like a message bringing people together? Tom Wolf is the leader of this state. If that's his claim, then he's admitting that he's in charge of a segregated racist state. What has he done to fix it? Nothing. They want you unarmed. They want to have security guards. They want your city to burn. They want to live in a gated community. They want you to not be able to drive a car. They want to have a third lake house. They want you to have to accept any illegal immigrant. They're still in their gated community. Everything they demand on you, they refuse to follow themselves. You can't go to work. You can't do stuff. They'll go to their third lake house. How many celebrities did you see sitting in hot tubs smoking cigars? This lockdown isn't that bad. Yeah, when you have a mansion. That's what's happening right now. They think that they're a different species than us. The rules apply to us, not to them. Wearing a MAGA hat is violence. Writing an op-ed that says you support ending the riots is violence. Engaging in a riot is free speech. Criticizing the FBI for all the corrupt stuff we saw that they did in the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, that's horrible. That's harming the country by bashing law enforcement. Saying all cops are racist and need to be defunded or abolished, that's great. They control the narrative. They are not the revolution. Those of us speaking the truth are the revolution. Never forget that. No matter what they take from you, they can't take away your principles. So you don't give them up. You don't give up who you are just because they're corrupt. You stand by it. So, all right, everyone. I should get to bed. Thank you all so much. That's a good crowd for me, 39. Thank you so much. If you are new, please like and subscribe. Thank you to anyone who donated financially. I'll give out, on DLive at least, I give out some lemons here. So let me get on there. Let's see here. Lemon chess. I'll add 50 of the lemons. Then I distribute. We'll see who the big winners are. Real quick, while that's happening, so tomorrow night I do a DLive exclusive. So I'll be doing a DLive live stream tomorrow at 11 p.m. So please, if you're on YouTube or something, or Twitch, or Facebook, subscribe to DLive. It's real simple. My channel is Normal America, capital N, capital A, on DLive. So yeah, it'll be a DLive exclusive tomorrow at 11. It's usually less formal than this. Not that this is pretty formal. Wednesday, I'll probably do some sort of live stream on all of my platforms. Saturday, I got my radio show at 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., which you can find on all my channels. Congratulations, Patriot Art, Phil, Love the Sax, Black Smoke, Slaney Chauffeur Bear. All right. So, yeah, and it really, if you are on YouTube, if you can go over to DLive and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it because, again, YouTube's censoring me like I believe they are. I'm not going to come on and talk about it a lot. It is what it is. We all know what YouTube is. We know what they are. They're censorious. They're part of the establishment. They follow the left-wing narrative. So they're going to not promote me. They're going to censor me. They're going to demonetize me. That's what they're going to do. So it sucks, but hey, I'm going to deal with it. So if you go to DLive, that's one platform that I'm trying to work with. Or you can follow me on Twitch. Though I haven't used Twitch a lot yet, so I don't know if they're just as bad or not. But anyways, the reason I bring it up is you could, what's going on there? If I get 300 subscribers on DLive, I could start posting my normal recorded videos there instead of just the live stream. So I'd really appreciate it. Thank you, Carvo. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and I'm trying to have more guests on and do more debates. So if you guys like that type of stuff, let me know. Now, I did come to a realization this week that I can't just be doing, all of this all the time because I have a life too. I have a wife who's awesome. I have to spend time with her. And you have to understand, my work schedule is I come into work Sunday night and I'm here straight through 24/7 till Thursday evening. So, when it's hard for me to do stuff Thursday night, Friday night, because I'd like to spend some time with my family before I come back into work. So yeah, thank you to all my new followers. Rational Wrong Thing, thanks for being on here. Man, Rational, I'll hit you up. We should do a video maybe tomorrow night. I would love to have you on. Kind of get Rational's great. Be nice to get the perspective. He lives in Australia, but don't hold that against him. But it'd be nice to get his perspective on how things are looking over there. Because make no mistake about it, this isn't just a U.S. movement. It's strongest in the U.S., but this is carrying over... Yeah, Carvo, I was a debater in college. So a little bit of my background, I went to Clarion University, which was basically the cheapest school you could go to in Pennsylvania. It's a state school. And I became one of the best debaters in the country. There's a debate tournament called the National Debate Tournament. And it's the equivalent of the NCAA basketball tournament. They take the top 72 teams in the country, and they all compete at this tournament. So you have to qualify for it. Though, unlike the NCAA basketball tournament, each school could send up to 3 teams to the National Debate Tournament. So I would guess there's probably only 40 schools that get to go. And we were the first ever state school to make it. As far as I'm not state school. We were the first ever team from Clarion University. And I was one of the very rare people that didn't debate in high school that ended up qualifying for the National Debate Tournament. So yeah, it was good. Yeah, SJG, where we at, man? I sent you what do you call it? A Hangouts message. I was trying to get you or Drone or Rational to do the video with me today. Yes, I was a master debater, fear of porn. Yeah, CNN won't let me. Hey, when I ran for Congress, that's one of the things I don't think about. People don't think about things strategically. So consider this. I'm running for a congressional seat in a special election. So there was a gentleman named Tom Marino that had won the election in 2018 as a Republican. He had some health issues and resigned. So then I'm running as a Republican to win this seat. And then I lost, but the Republican did win. My argument was this. Whoever you vote for here will not sign one piece of legislation. Not one vote they cast from now until 2020 will make any difference whatsoever. Why? Because the Democrats control Congress. So they're not going to have a bill that comes up that's like, geez, if we only had one more Republican vote. It's not going to happen. So what did you want in a congressperson? You wanted someone who could fight back against the narrative, who could go on these platforms, who could go to the mainstream media and make them look foolish. And that's why you should pick me. But they didn't, so here we are. Yeah, by the way, check out my buddy Rational Wrong Thing's channel, which, Rational, they could just click your name on YouTube and you can get it, right? And also my buddy SJG Perspectives channel. Both of them are in the YouTube chat there. Start times are almost always going to be between 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. Eastern time. At least every Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, I'll probably also be doing videos at those same times on my channels. So remember, Dylan, thank you. So for those of you who don't know, Dylan Burns, who's there on YouTube, he's one of these filthy lefty... No, I'm just joking. Dylan hosted that debate that you could find on my channel here the other day. Dylan, I believe, I'm not speaking out of turn to say someone who's left-wing. I couldn't even tell. That's how good of a moderator he was. So he called it right down the middle. And so I really appreciate that. And I am committed to trying to bring people on my channel and trying to go onto other channels with people that disagree with me. Because I think what we could all learn is there are things to learn from people that disagree with you. Even if they don't completely change your mind, you can understand a lot of people are actually coming from a place where they're a moral person. It's not just like, oh, you're horrible if you disagree with me. And so I'm committed to trying to show that we can talk to each other and try to solve these problems even if we disagree. So, yeah, check out Dylan's channel. He's also on Twitch. which you can check out there. I know a lot of my people probably aren't on Twitch, but you should check it out. There's a lot of good politics stuff going on that's going on in places like Twitch. And if you're one of my friends that's on here from the left, that might be a channel that you really like, Dylan's channel. You might find someone who's more aligned with you politically. That so far, I've had limited interactions with you, Dylan, but so far I find you to be quite reasonable. So yeah, consider checking that out. And even if you're not a fan of things on the left, I really do recommend that you check out other people that are coming from other backgrounds to kind of see what's going on, even if you don't agree with them. And for me, my money, going to an independent content creator that's on the left is always, always, always superior than going to any outlet in the mainstream media, because you have to understand those media people are beholden to their advertisers, or beholden to the corporations that control them. So at least, even if you disagree with an independent content creator on the left or the right, whatever, at least you probably could be sure that, you know, they're not under the thumb of, you know, some mega corporation that's telling them they have to say a certain thing. So I do recommend checking out. And that's where, you know, I first started, you know, it's kind of a long story, but I argued with someone on Twitter who was left wing, and then I asked them if they wanted to come on the show, and they did, and they introduced me to David Pakman and Destiny, both who are, Pakman's a little more mainstream, I guess, I don't know, but they're both on the left. And then I debated Destiny on his show a couple times, and I think that's probably where Dylan saw me from, was debating Destiny. So then, just that little thing, talking to someone who disagreed with me on Twitter, now I've been introduced to at least 7, 8 content creators that disagree with me, but that we could have reasonable discussions with. So, yeah. You get knocked out. Well, hopefully it doesn't come to that. Where's the tattoo? I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, yeah, so with Destiny, I accidentally, so actually when I was on Dylan's channel, I actually asked permission and recorded his screen cap of it. With Destiny, I screwed it up. I only got the audio. I screwed up my recording, and so I didn't feel justified in using his video. If you go to Destiny's channel, you can see the video of me and Destiny debating, but I only wanted to use the audio, which I did get permission from Destiny for, so that's why it's just a picture of me. So, yeah, hopefully my voice is distinctive enough. Yeah, you just got my notification, yeah. Yeah, Dylan, thank you. I would be honored to come back on. And let me say, I truly mean this, Dylan. I thought I handled myself well in the debate, too. But I also thought some of the other people that disagreed with me did as well. I'd really like to work, for example, with Prime Case again. I thought that he had, like, the fact that he was trying to come up with real-world solutions, I really appreciated. And I had a great time on there. I would love to come on again. I don't know if I could do it every Friday or anything like that, because, like I was saying, I gotta spend time with my wife. Also, I guess I could say this because my wife never watches my stuff, but I just found out that I told people this the other day, but I just found out that my wife's pregnant for the first time, so I'm going to be a dad for the first time. So there is a chance with that. Right now we're at about 9 weeks, so there's a chance as that goes on, I'll be doing less and less on here. And it's a weird thing because there's so much struggle and bad stuff with COVID, with the protests and things like that, you know, the murder of George Floyd going on in the world, but my life's never been better. Like, I'm ecstatic. So it's a weird juxtaposition. Oh, thank you, everyone. Yeah, I appreciate it. But just to let you know, that's where I'll be in the coming months. So I had to, like, my wife, this is what happened Friday night. I was like, oh, it'll be like a 2 or 3 hour debate. And then I was up with Dylan. I think we went an hour long. We went like 4 hours. And then my wife was in bed. And by the time she woke up, I was doing my radio show. So she was none too pleased with me. So I was like, yeah, I get it. I got to make more time for family. That's absolutely true. Okay. I'll address this quickly, Messenger. Okay. I don't know about the, like, I don't engage in things at the conspiratorial level, like kind of you're suggesting, the idea. I think George Floyd was murdered. I don't think that it was a plant or something like that. Is there a chance that he had a relationship with the guy that murdered him? Apparently they perhaps worked together before, possibly, but I don't think that, I mean, I get it. People are looking into these questions of tattoos and stuff like that. That's not me. I'm not going to talk about that stuff on the show. I believe he was murdered. So I don't begrudge anyone who wants to look into stuff for themselves. You know, we still have the prevailing narrative Epstein killed himself. That seems to be ridiculous to me. So by all means, look into the stuff you want, but I don't really cover that type of stuff here. One thing I will say that is aggravating me that I see from people on the right is the idea that, well, did you know that George Floyd committed this crime, or he did this, or he did that? I don't care. I don't care at all, right? Oh, he did drugs. I don't care. He was clearly murdered. Yes, the autopsy could have showed originally that it was this fact or that. It is clear to me that the police officer engaged in unwarranted, unnecessary force. And even if that wasn't the direct cause of death, it led to that death. And he should be held accountable. Now, if you want to get into discussions of does that mean second degree, third degree manslaughter, that's fine. I'm not an expert in that. But it is clear to me that that Chauvin is responsible for George Floyd's death. And I don't care if George Floyd was a saint or a terrible person. It makes no difference to me. Someone should not be murdered and then excused because, well, they were in a gang or something like that. I'm sorry. That's just not what I'm looking at. Now, if you were someone who George Floyd personally agreed, like I've heard people say that maybe he had attacked his girlfriend or something. Does that mean that his tragic death justifies what he did to you personally? No, I'm not saying that, but that's far beyond my pay grade. I'm not dealing with that stuff. I just think that it's unfortunate that so many people, it's unfortunate that when we see a tragic case, and I'm just as guilty of this, everybody wants to say, oh, I hope it was someone on the other political aisle that did this heinous thing. And it's also unfortunate that if someone passes away and our side did it, that we want to look for the flaws in the person that was killed. I don't care if George Floyd was a really bad person or if he was a really good person. He was murdered needlessly. That's what I have to say. So I know that might not be the most popular with people on the right, but that's just how I feel. So I think that, there's this idea of should he be being martyred? I don't know. The guy was murdered, and if people want to celebrate him in whatever way, they have the right to do it. I disagree with the racial narrative that's going on with it, and that's what the whole show is about. But I don't begrudge people that want to make this a symbol. That's just me. So I know people like Candace Owens have said otherwise. I disagree with her. So, but that's where I come from. And I think you start to show callousness if you're like, well, he wasn't the great person. Yeah, that could be true, but it's just not the time and the place. And I don't know how that helps resolve any of this situation. I don't know how it helps morally. If your goal is, how can we bring this country together? I don't know how that helps. And even if your goal is just politically, how do I help my side win? You're making your side look real dumb, if that's as far as I'm concerned. So, the death was heinous. Yeah, that's what matters. So, okay. Now I'm 15 minutes late. Anyone else have anything specifically? I hear you, Messenger. If that's, I don't believe that's the case, but I'm not saying you're a terrible person for looking into that angle, but I just don't believe that's the case. I had people swearing to me that Chauvin, the cop that killed George Floyd, was actually Ben Bailey from Cash Cab. Swore it to me. Sent me pictures. Emailed me pictures. This is Ben Bailey from Cash Cab. It is not Ben Bailey from Cash Cab. He doesn't even look that similar. And I've personally met Ben Bailey, who I've watched do stand-up. It's definitely not him. So... people come up with that. Yeah, I mean, the Aubrey thing's a little different in the sense of, was what he was doing directly at the time, did that help escalate or lead to a situation? That's different. If you want to say, was George Floyd resisting arrest? I still think from the video it's clearly unjustified, it's murder. But at least that conversation's different to me than, was George Floyd a bad dude the day before or something like that. The Aubrey stuff I haven't looked into as much. I've heard superficial things that it looked like he may have been in the commission of attempting to commit a crime or something of that nature. Maybe so. I've also heard there could have been allegedly racial comments made after the shooting. I don't know. Again, when we take these specific situations, I don't begrudge people looking into them in a factual manner, but I think we have to be careful. Okay, I'll take your word for it, Messenger. I still, I'm not saying that I think you're a bad person. I don't think that that's the case. but maybe you're right. Maybe you know more about that. So, hey, what's up, library? I'm just heading out, unfortunately, man. But I'll be back tomorrow on DLive. Check me out at Normal America on DLive. Thank you all so much. I really, 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 really appreciate it. You guys are the best. And I just want to let you know, go ahead, library. I'll stay for a second. I think that you guys are the best, regardless if you agree or disagree with me. I enjoy the conversation. I think that even if I was just talking to one person, I would be totally content. I'm amazed that people want to hear what just some nobody like me has to say. So thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you for those of you that have supported me financially. I really appreciate it. You guys are the best, and it really, it makes me feel good that there are people out there that want to listen to me. I hope, library on Twitch says, I hope you can gain a more positive view on America, man. There are parts that suck, but overall we have things real good here. I agree. Absolutely. That's basically been my entire message. Yeah, I mean, that's actually so the point. Library says he hopes I don't leave this, get to my mental health. Look, I seem like a raving lunatic at times when I'm on here. I'm one of the happiest people you'll ever meet. You could ask my brother. He's on the chat here. I'm a very happy person, so I compartmentalize very well. I do think that there's a lot of things that we need to address in this country, but it's a great country. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I do my best to try in my best way to address that, to engage in constitutional principles and the idea of liberty and personal responsibility. Hopefully I come across doing that well, but by no means think that this somehow, I mean, everything takes a toll on anything, Just seeing the footage of George Floyd get murdered takes a toll on you. Seeing the riots take a toll on you, The Floyd thing was rough. The Floyd video was rough. The video of David Korn dying was rough. As the black man standing there going, why'd you kill him over a TV? Stay with me, old timer. He's yelling. That's tough. Seeing the video of that girl that was bawling on Periscope because her sister was killed in the protest, it's brutal. And this stuff's tough. But I think I do a reasonable job of compartmentalizing. All right. I do have to go. Thank you all so much. 11 p.m., 10:30 or 11 p.m. tomorrow night on DLive. DLive exclusive. So go over to DLive, check out Normal America. The reason I'm doing the DLive exclusives, I'm trying to get up to 300 subs so I can start posting videos there. Check out SJG Perspective. Check out Rational Wrong Think. Check out Dylan Burns TV. All channels that I think you'll like. So check that stuff out. I hear you, Rational Tony Temple said. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much, and as always, have a good one.